Last December, we did a primer on a pretty significant problem facing e-tail consumers: dark patterns. Here's Mugdha Waria from that episode.
While transacting online, we frequently see messages that trigger a rush of urgency, such as "only 2 rooms left, hurry," or "items in your cart will go out of stock soon." But how often are these real? Turns out, almost never. These are tactics known as dark patterns used by e-commerce platforms, brands, and advertisers.
It was also in December the government came up with a set of guidelines for prevention and regulation of these patterns. Now, these guidelines primarily demarcated dark patterns into 13 types. False urgency that you just heard Mugdha talking about, basket sneaking or stealthily adding expenses to your shopping cart, confirm shaming, messages like "I will travel unsecured" when you're booking an airline ticket, for instance, subscription trap, getting into a subscription in 3 clicks but finding it really complex to get out of it or to cancel it, interface interference, like coding the option the app wants you to choose with a darker shade of color and the alternative with a lighter one. So, guidelines on 13 such types of dark patterns, any practice of which would mean a violation of the Consumer Protection Act. So obviously, most of us thought that these rules would lead to considerable curbing of such patterns and practices. But cut to now, October 2024, that hasn't really happened.
Dark patterns are fairly rampant in India. Yes, the guidelines have been out there for almost a year now, but very slow in terms of action. Not a single notice to our understanding has been issued yet.
We found that out of 53, 52 apps had one or another dark pattern. That's the extent to which we are all exposed to dark patterns.
We have started issuing notices to the companies. There is still a very long way to go about. You have to keep on evolving with times and keep a very tight vigil on how these so-called marketing strategies are aiming to befool the consumer.
In fact, on the contrary, as the festive season brings with it a buying frenzy among Indians, the government has seen a surge in complaints from consumers about what they feel are dark pattern traps on e-com apps. A government crackdown on such companies seems to be in the offing, but we can't say how much that will really help. So, why is it so difficult to curb this menace? What are the ways in which companies continue to engage in dark patterns? Are consumers at least more aware, if not less vulnerable? And what is the government doing? All this and more in today's episode. We speak to someone who has been extensively working with consumer data and lobbying with the government to solve this issue. We also speak to the chief of India's ad and marketing watchdog, and we have India's Consumer Affairs Secretary. Listen on. It's Thursday, the 24th of October. I'm your host, Anirban Chaudhary. This is The Morning Brief. First, I spoke to Sachin Taparia, founder of Local Circles, which is one of India's leading community platforms and pollsters on consumer issues. Sachin and his team have been doing numerous surveys on each type of dark pattern and their impact. So, I obviously started by asking him this. What would you say are your top 3 findings from all the surveys that you've done on this problem of dark patterns?
So what we have learned, Anirban, is dark patterns are fairly rampant in India, from airline sites to travel sites to taxi aggregators, and from food aggregators to even online payment platforms. They're everywhere. The ones that we see getting repeated are dark patterns like drip pricing, or what we also call as hidden charges. Fairly common and easy to understand. When you book an airline ticket, you look for fares, you see a fare of 5,000. By the time you getting ready to pay for it, it is 7,500, because there are other additional charges that were not disclosed to you upfront. But when you actually go out to pay for it, those charges are added at the last step. Basket sneaking is another dark pattern which is very common in India. We've found through our surveys, where a product or a service or a donation is added to your cart, without your consent. So you then have to opt out of it. And many times, there is no option of removing it also. So that's basket sneaking. The third one that is also, quite common is something that we call as forced action, where, you don't intend to do something, but the site or the platform or the app are designed in such a way that they basically lead you to something which is a forced action. A lot of complaints came during the World Cup, during the recent Coldplay booking in Mumbai, where,
Absolutely.
A consumer was actually getting ready to transact. They were all on the last step. They'd done everything, right? And then they were booted out. And, it becomes really dark from a dark pattern perspective when, such things happen. And there are sales that are happening, of those same seats that are happening in parallel. We also see a lot of bait and switch where, something is shown and something else is actually sold to you. In the case of payment platforms, a cashback of, rupees 50 guaranteed or, advised as if you're getting the cashback. But when you actually go to transact using that particular payment app, it says it is up to rupees 50. And in essence, you actually don't get any cashback. And then you also have, subscription trap where you actually, go and buy something one time, but you later find that a subscription has been added to you. And now you'll get a recurring charge essentially every month with no easy way to opt out or cancel as it was, to subscribe. And then we see SaaS billing, false urgency, these are also somewhat common. So that's kind of the essence of, what we have found through all these different sectoral surveys from e-commerce to travel and from, insurance platforms to payment platforms, something that repeats basically across these sectors.
Sachin, are dark patterns always intentional, or is it sometimes, just a design flaw as well?
It is. Our assessment, Anirban, is that in India, if I were to look at, all the different platforms that have dark patterns, and we've studied about 250 so far, 10 to 20% is just bad design. 80 to 90% is essentially bad intent, which is essentially forcing the consumer through deceptive design or by misleading them to perform certain actions which they otherwise, won't in the due course or in the natural course. And, where it becomes really challenging is that it's actually a breakdown of consumer trust.
But it's been 10 months to the new guidelines and, the companies still continue to indulge in these practices, no?
Yes, the guidelines have been out there for almost a year now. We worked, on the initial guidelines with them, but, very slow in terms of action on this particular matter. Typically, they are able to act very quickly on anything we escalate from local circles. In this case, not a single notice to our understanding has been issued yet. But I think it's important that when rules come, when a Gazette notification comes, that there is action. And, what that action does is it gives the message that the government is actually serious about, these rules. And platforms will start to fall in place because it's in the long run, it's in their interest to actually remove these dark patterns.
But can you elaborate a little bit on why the delay? Why do you think there is a delay from the government? Is it the nature of the beast? Is there not enough understanding of dark patterns per se, also among government agencies? And like I said, the nature of the beast because it keeps evolving. Companies come up with new tricks all the time. Is it a mix of that, or is it just laggard response time?
So very good question. It's actually a complex subject, Anirban. And I think, there are dark patterns and there are perceived dark patterns. So, if you were to kind of leave it open, some consumers or, some analysts would call everything a dark pattern, right? A flash sale is going on a e-commerce website. They would even classify that as a dark pattern. So I think it requires understanding. Just a flash sale going on an e-commerce platform is not a dark pattern. But if you do certain, manipulative things with it, where you actually are not selling something at 75% discount, but you're just advertising it, that can be classified as a dark pattern. Similarly, you take the case of taxi aggregators, right? You go on the first screen when you open it. It says the nearest cab is 2 minutes away. But then you actually go and you click on the next option. But in reality, it is 10 to 15 minutes away, actually, the one that you've picked. Basically, it's a classic dark pattern. One common one that has been reported worldwide is the Uber dark pattern, where basis how much battery is there in your phone, they actually increase your search prices and final, charges.
Because your phone will die, so you will.
Yeah. Though, Uber has denied it. So, you can imagine the extent that some platforms can go to. We don't have any evidence that is happening in India yet, at least. But, we keep studying these dark patterns, and, newer ones keep getting reported at newer sites, which weren't there earlier, and now there are. So I think it is understanding these finer details. It's a little, complex for the government to understand what is actually a dark pattern. But I think, we as in local circles have done a lot of work. And if they actually look at some of the details that we have accumulated, I think it's fairly easy to kind of say that, look, these are the dark patterns. Bring the companies together, present it to them and say, look, fix these, give them a set period of time, right? And once that period of time is over, basically start issuing, penalty notices and other notices to take action under the CCPA, Unfair Trade Practice Act. So they have all the tools. I think it's just understanding it and moving forward with it, Anirban.
Next, my colleague Diya Rekhi spoke to Manisha Kapoor, Secretary General of the Advertising Standards Council of India. Now, ASCI has been working with its members, 375 companies from across sectors, to create awareness and prevent their engagement, voluntary or otherwise, in dark patterns. But has it really helped? Let's find out.
Manisha, you had put out a report recently on dark patterns, which had some really interesting insights. Could you take our listeners through what some of the biggest findings of the report were?
Yeah, I think the first thing, of course, that struck us is how universal dark patterns are. And, we studied 53 of top India apps. Collectively, they have a download of more than 2 billion. So that is the number of consumers who are, in a sense, exposed to these apps collectively. And we found that out of 53, 52 apps, had one or another dark pattern. So some of them had more, some of them have had only one, but that's the extent to which we are all exposed to dark patterns. So imagine 2 billion downloads collectively with just these 52 apps. And of course, in our lives, we use many, many more. So for me, that was the first kind of big learning that came through, which is just the universality of the presence of dark patterns.
Manisha, I wanted to understand a little bit about the sectors where you saw the most amount of flouting happening.
So health tech was one area where we saw the highest average number of instances. So almost 8+ dark patterns per app that we studied. So health tech is a fairly significant player. And again, it's the kind of app that all of us are increasingly using to keep track of our health, to keep track of our diet and fitness levels. The other two were bookings and which is largely your travel bookings and e-commerce sites. Then followed by fintech, delivery and logistics, ed tech, which is education tech, cab booking sites. So these were some of the sectors that came up on top of our study in terms of the observation that we had around the scale and extent of deployment of dark patterns.
Could you break down what the dark patterns that apps employ really are? I mean, how do these work?
So a couple of things. I think one of the processes in which a lot of apps, including health tech apps, tend to, what are they collecting so much information for? The whole onboarding process, the amount of information that is being asked for, it's not very evident why that information is being asked. So that becomes, a concern with the data that is being collected and, what the privacy policies are, how that data is to be used, what are the guardrails around the use of that data. So that is one clear area. I think the other that we found, particularly in health tech, was this whole time-based pressure, creating a false sense of urgency that, this offer is only there for, the next 1 hour and then you will have a clock ticking. Whereas actually, when you look at a health tech service, I mean, there is really no inventory, right? I mean, unlike, unless you're a physical product. So it's fine if you, have a limited period discount, that's fine. But you say an offer is valid for the next 20 minutes, right? Where you're kind of not letting the consumer think through their choices and really have a sense of what they want, whereas creating an unreasonable pressure to sign up. So that's a particular thing that in health tech apps, we saw quite significantly.
From your own conversation with companies, can you tell me what are the motivations behind a company engaging in dark patterns?
Dark patterns, I mean, the reason they exist is because there is pressure on sales and conversions, okay? So, which is typically thought of as marketing effectiveness measures, how many consumers have I got to sign up, what are the sales numbers I have, etc., etc. So that's the reason why there seems to be an undue pressure created for consumers to convert. But I think what has to be remembered is that if you start making the online experience unpleasant, let's say I sign up for a service and I want to delete my account. To sign up, it'll take me 3 clicks. To delete, I will really have to figure out how to delete my account. I will have to navigate various options in the menu to even know how to delete an account. So when more of that starts happening, the consumers become more and more wary of the online space. And that is detrimental in a sense to even the brand's interest.
Another aspect that I'd love for you to touch upon, Manisha, is about the Ministry of Consumer Affairs. They had come out with these 13 guidelines for e-commerce firms, and I wanted to understand how much of it has been implemented and whether any action has been taken.
I think we are not necessarily privy to the government's action on this front, but we definitely see and engage in conversation with some of our own members as to how they are making certain changes and corrections to their UI UX design systems, so that there is, I think, a greater understanding within the industry also as to what is allowed or not allowed. We also have to remember that there will be new dark patterns that keep emerging. They will also follow certain trends. So you will see some kinds of dark patterns automatically becoming a little lower in terms of incidence and newer ones taking their place. So I think a longer term commitment from all stakeholders working together is required. These are the kind of guidelines that will need to be frequently updated, that will need to have constant conversation and consultation around this.
Absolutely. But coming back to your report, you had mentioned that there were 53 apps that you had surveyed for the report, right? A lot of them must be your members as well. And now that you've detected these dark patterns in some of your own members, what is the kind of action that ASCI is taking and how receptive have the companies been?
Yeah, so some of the companies are our members, not all. I think we've had extremely good conversations with the members that were covered here. I think they have been very proactive in reaching out to ASCI and saying that, can you help us understand what we could do better? So I think that's a conversation which is very important. And I'm happy to say that it has been extremely proactive. So, when we see the change, we see certain things which were kind of by default tick mark earlier to be added to your basket. We see some of that going away. So I think there is a greater consciousness in terms of what can be done and what should be done. I think it's also important for us to address that the tech ecosystem, which is creating all of these apps, which is creating these templates, which eventually companies, borrow from, also need to be educated, right? Because, for them, they are just trying to create what they feel is most effective. Whereas an organization has to then layer it with brand thinking and consumer centricity. Some of these questions now are coming more and more to the fore. What is ethical design? What is conscious design practices? And I think both in the marketing and in the tech, disciplines, there needs to be greater conversation and consciousness about these.
Okay, so now let's go to what the lawmakers are doing. And the answer is that they have been making efforts to curb dark patterns and also towards the overall protection of the e-com consumer. The Consumer Protection E-Commerce Rules 2020 mandate transparency, disclosure, and fairness in e-com transactions. Then there's the Consumer Protection Authority that investigates and penalizes unfair trade practices, including dark patterns. The National Consumer Helpline educates consumers on digital safety. There have been public campaigns to raise awareness about online safety and dark patterns. The Digital Economy Working Group fosters collaboration between stakeholders. And India's National Digital Health Blueprint ensures ethical health data usage. Remember, health tech apps are among the most surprising dark pattern offenders. To understand all this and more, I spoke to India's Consumer Affairs Secretary, Nidhi Khare. I started by asking her, what do the authorities do when they suspect a company of engaging in dark patterns?
So usually the pattern of working in the Central Consumer Protection Authority is that in the initial stage, we try through a preliminary inquiry report to establish that the matter is actually a class action matter and it is actually violating the consumer rights. The party is adopting unfair trade practices or it is also misleading advertisements. So either on one of these steps, the class action is initiated. However, once the notice has been issued, the other party is given at least 15 days to respond. And based on their written submissions, if we feel that the party is not ready to make a course correction, or if they are only trying to hide behind their own policies which they are not ready to say scrutinize in the interest of consumer rights, then we send it for detailed investigation to the DG investigation. And from there on, we then give them an opportunity of hearing. We share them the report, the investigation report, and ask them for their comments. It is only after that a final order is passed, which may have penalty or which may have directions or dissuading them or instructing them not to use it. And we have started issuing notices to the companies. We've started asking people, I mean, these have also included the airlines, the major e-commerce entities, to basically explain certain conducts that they are adopting.
Got it. So, how many notices have been sent yet? And, it'd be great if you could name the companies that you've sent the notices to.
We don't try to name the companies, but I can say that prominent, airlines, prominent e-commerce companies have been issued notices because there were certain activities which we found to be actually part of a dark pattern. And we have issued notices to all of them.
So, have any of these companies tried to hide behind their policies or tweaked their websites in such a way that, they can sort of sidestep the guidelines, but still continue to practice dark patterns? Have you noticed any such instance?
So one of the airlines, whom we had issued notice, they were actually adopting a very strange practice. They were saying it was paid seat arrangement, but when they were giving it to those people who had not paid extra, then they were assigning them, some middle seats or some such things, where their family members were all thrown across the airline.
Right.
So we tried to then ask them that this is a dark pattern that they are adopting, because all the prices of the seats should have been disclosed upfront. So if people want to pay less and still be seated in a middle seat, that's all right. But then this should not happen that on the front you are saying that there is no discrimination, but you are basically trying to sell certain seats for a higher denomination, which other consumers may not know.
So, did the airline follow your mandate?
So they have actually made the course correction. They have also tried to update their website. They have also given up this need to unnecessarily assign, middle seats to hapless consumers. So we have told them that while the consumers are booking on their website, the prices that they are offering should be absolutely upfront, and which they have started doing it.
But there are still instances of, dark pattern practices across segments. It'll only increase, I think, in this festive season. And I'm talking about, the festive season, of course, which sees a massive spurt in sales, and customers are in a tearing hurry. And, they're more and more vulnerable to these dark patterns. How is the government taking care of that? And also, have you received complaints that show that there are new patterns emerging of companies, exploiting these dark patterns?
In fact, I must say that, over this 1 year, the consumers have also become smarter, and many of them have started declining the sale or, something at Rupee 1 sale. So we have found out that actually the recurrence of this has also gone down because people have also become smarter. They are now careful. When they see such things, they don't immediately fall in trap of such discount frenzy. And at the same time, we are also looking at the e-commerce sites as to how they are actually dealing and projecting, sales or discounts, or whether they are not revealing information. So we are now preparing to send them notices, and they will be taken to task.
Do you think the enforcement of the guidelines are, for want of a better word, a little slow? As I'm coming from the fact that none of the offenders, if I may use that word, have been penalized yet.
Usually, as I said, for the class action matters, we provide an opportunity to the company to come clean. In fact, many times what happens is if you just penalize the company, the penalty may be so small that they may be again, going back to their old habits. So what is important is to also make sure that they adopt corrective steps. They also make sure that they do not adopt the same strategy, and they should come clean that they have stopped using any dark pattern to fool the consumer.
Understood.
In fact, the airlines episode which I was telling, they have understood the point that they cannot, make it very difficult for the consumer if he has to, get a satisfactory response from them or any redressal from them. So they have actually made the course correction. They have also tried to update their website. They have also given up this need to unnecessarily assign, middle seats to hapless consumers. So we have told them that while the consumers are booking on website, the prices that they are offering should be absolutely upfront, and which they have started doing it.
And all this will take time. It will require systemic changes, heightened awareness, and a fear among companies of much more than a few crores worth of penalties. It's actually a global problem, and regulators across the world have been trying to curb it with varying degrees of success. A recent note from Grant Thornton said that in the European Union, regulations such as the Digital Services Act, General Data Protection Regulation, and the Unfair Commercial Practices Directive deal with issues of dark patterns. Some states in the US have introduced legislation to combat dark patterns, including the California Privacy Rights Act, the Connecticut Data Privacy Act, and the Colorado Privacy Act. In comparison, India really has a long way to go. In fact, it may be at least a year before it makes any headway in solving this problem. Until then, it's up to us to be wiser, more aware, and always check before we click. That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by Vinay Joshi, sound designed by Indranil Bhattacharjee. A new episode of The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. Also, don't miss the new episode from our latest series, ET Wealth and Beyond, in collaboration with BSC, in which ET's markets editor Nishant Vasudevan talks to veteran investors Sunil Singhania and Kenneth Andrade about the art of investing. This is your host, Anirban Chaudhary, signing off. Keep listening. Have a good rest of the week.